What's up, everybody? Hope you're all having an awesome evening. So, we did manage to come in 14th place in the Modern Challenge last night, Thursday, October 10th, the later challenge. So, I figured I would go over the matches here, show a little recap of some of the gameplay, talk about the deck list, and hopefully it inspires you to go out and run your own challenge, run an RCQ, do something. So, let's hop into it. Main deck, not a whole lot to talk about. I did swap a couple flex spots around. For instance, I've been messing around with a second copy of Cling to Dust in the main. In this case, I swapped it to a Consigned to Memory. Second, Shoot the Sheriff, swapped to a Long Goodbye. The reason for these changes, when I initially went to sign up for the event, I saw a bunch of players that are commonly on decks like Living End and Eldrazi, and kind of decided to hedge for that. And I figured with the uptick in the Oculus builds, I wanted to be ready for those with Long Goodbye for opposing Oculus or opposing Psychic Frogs. The rest of the main deck, pretty stock as far as FrogTide goes. As you notice, I'm not on one of the Oculus Unearth builds. I don't think they're bad. I just don't like losing percentage points against the part of the field that's not Boros. I feel like against Boros, you can gain a lot of percentage points back by approaching the matchup the right way, playing pretty tight, not giving your opponent an opportunity to do something over the top explosive. So I kind of feel like I'm okay not having the version of Dimir that is base better against Boros, in favor of having the version that's base a little bit better against most of the rest of the field. It's not a perfect better against the rest of the field, but I do think that the traditional 4 Murktide shells are better in the mirror, like by a decent bit. And I do think you're better into some of the combo decks just because the Oculus builds naturally have to cut some amount of that interaction to fit in Unearths and a second cantrip like Thought Scour or Consider. So you just have to keep that in mind. In the sideboard, I cut the third copy of Mystical Dispute. Since I moved a Consign to the main, I just kind of wanted a little less conditional counter in the sideboard. Kept the 3 Stern Scoldings and the 3 Consigns I already had in the sideboard, along with the Toxic Deluge. Added in 4 Dalthy Voidwalker. Before we even get into the gameplay, I'll go ahead and just straight up tell you, don't play Dalthy. When I was signing up for the event, I saw a bunch of names that I recognized on Eldrazi, on Yawgmoth, on Living End, like matchups specifically tailored to Dalthy. So I asked a buddy, the Dogfish, who's in the chat from time to time on Twitch, if he had any suggestions for cards that would be good in those matchups. Suggested Dalthy. Decided to just throw 4 copies in there. Have not tested the card. If anything, it would be better in an Unearthed shell than it would be in this shell, but here we are. In addition to the 4 Dalthy, 1 extra copy of Unlicensed Hearse and Ghost Vacuum. I know that's like a lot of Grave Hate, but I'm not really bringing in Dalthy for the purpose of being Grave Hate. It's an incidental purpose, absolutely, against matchups like Living In and Yawgmoth. But more, it's just like a good value creature to bring in. Might be able to exile some stuff here and there. Might be able to disrupt a little bit. So don't think of it as a replacement for like actual Grave Hate. Either way, let's go ahead and hop into some of the matches so you can see how it played out. Again, maybe decide that you want to run a deck like this in one of your future events. Always helps to have some gameplay in your back corner to refer back to. As always, down below I'll have link to the deck list, link to the Twitch in case you want to catch a live stream, link to the Discord in case you want to come talk about the list or any of the other decks we've got going on, and a link to the Twitter, which is the first place that gets updated whenever a stream's going live. Also, make sure that the audio is good. I mentioned in the last video, new microphone. So, still working out some of the settings here and there to make sure it's up to par. So, if you have suggestions, if it sounds too loud, too soft, if it's cutting out, anything like that, let me know. Either way. Round number 1, my opponent, I know the name. They are a pretty much Thoptersword exclusive player, which is fine. I played them at the end of the Swiss 2 challenges ago, something like that. So then I knew they were on Thoptersword going into it. Kept a hand with a spell snare for potential like Thopter Foundry or Stoneforge Mystic. Maybe a Harbinger to stop some sagas. Bowmaster if they don't do anything. So pretty reasonable opening hand. Honestly, at this point, I kind of thought for a second, like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're on Hammer Time. But Hammer Time not doing anything turn 1 or turn 2 would be extremely unusual. I decide to hold off on the Harbinger here because if I play it out, my opponent still has white mana. And if they're able to do something like play a Stoneforge, I don't actually have a way to get the Stoneforge off the board. So I run the risk of them like Stoneforging. Maybe they get a Cauldra. I don't even know if they run Cauldra. But something like that, they'd kind of be able to run away from it. Or run away from me. I Ganjo down one of my Bowmasters. So I'll get the Harbinger when they tap out. And as expected, there's the Stoneforge. But we do have this Fatal Push now. Take out the Stoneforge. Play out a MTGO and say, hey, we got a Spell Snare. We got a Sink to bounce something impactful that you do. We'll see what happens. Pretty clean game 1. Now, I will say, I did sideboard pretty poorly. So, I know they're on Urza and Stoneforge. So, I should have brought in Stern Scolding. I ended up leaning heavier into the blue and boarding in Mystical Disputes instead. Kind of saying like, oh, I'm leaving in my removal. I'll deal with Stoneforge or Urza or something as they come up. And I'll save my Mystical Disputes for things like Metallic Rebukes, for Thopter Foundries, anything of that sort. I took out the Bowmasters because they weren't really killing anything. So I didn't think I would particularly need those. And brought in the Dothies because they answer Sword of the Meek. Like if my opponent goes to sack a Sword of the Meek to a Thopter Foundry, then Dothy exiles it and just stops any combo shenanigans on the spot. That was like my thought process. I kept in, I think, 1 Harbinger of the Seas because of Urza's Saga. Got a handful of counters, so we'll try to convert on some of those early. Maybe should have used the Spell Snare there instead of the Spell Pierce. But I figure I'd rather like stop a Stoneforge from resolving it all if I have the option to. Like getting down Dothy here, I felt pretty good for a second. They had Portable Hole, but they missed a land drop. I could like portable or sink into Stupor the Portable Hole and get back my Dothy. But I'd have to tap out for that. And in the meantime, I kind of have to deal with these Thopter Foundries. They followed up with finding a Urza's Saga. A little rough. Definitely a very good hand against me. Or a very good top deck against me. We can consign the Urza's Saga trigger to stop them from being able to make constructs. Unfortunately, Urza can still make constructs and brings a pretty good follow-up to an Urza. So we were on the right idea by countering that initial talisman to try to slow him down. It just so happened that they managed to hit a couple land drops in a row there, and that really, really punished us. Cameo and Aether Spellbomb, so good find for them off the Urza Saga. A good one to have access to. A Mori Vault that I've never seen before. So it's to activate it, it is 3 mana, discard a card, and you basically get to look at the top X cards, where X is the number of artifacts that you control, and put one of them into your hand. So it does dig very well. You got a bunch of these like talismans and portable hole, springleaf drum style effects. Stoneforge, got Shadow Spear and played it out. Decided to go ahead and kill the Stoneforge just to try to keep them from equipping up a Shadow Spear. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have just like let them have the Stoneforge, so they'd have to waste some mana equipping it. But regardless, with Urza, they've got all the mana in the world they need with like Portable Hole, Shadow Spear, the One Ring, tapping for mana. Able to find another copy of the One Ring to sty off this this life loss. And since I don't have Bowmaster in this game because I wasn't expecting the One Ring, that's how it goes. Now, I'm sure you could argue like, oh, your opponent's playing Thoptersword. They're playing an Artifacts Matter blue-white deck. Like, they're playing the One Ring. And that's a very safe assumption. I kind of figured I've got a game to play with. I won the first game. I'll see what game 2, like what adjustments they're making. And then game 3, I get to come back on the play. So I don't think it's really much lost by boarding out, like hedging pretty bad against them not having the One Ring. Trying to get a little leaner. Game 3, like brought some Bowmasters back in. A hand with a frog on the play, so like all I got to do is dodge. Or Force Negation solves like all my issues. All I got to do is dodge a turn 2. What's it called? Not Static Prison, but when they got. I saw Supreme Verdict game 2. I was a little afraid. All right, let's talk through this this turn a little bit. I was a little afraid of my opponent having Supreme Verdict again. So I ended up not playing the second frog out for 2 reasons. One, they had 2 lands and a Springleaf Drum open. So if they had a Metallic Rebuke, then I would just like be running this frog directly into a Metallic Rebuke. If they don't have the Metallic Rebuke, then I threaten like running both of my threats out into a Supreme Verdict. And either one of those just kind of like shuts down my turn. So instead I decide I'm just going to hold up my mana, counterspell something on their side, and then try to like untap, decide on the frog there. Should have jammed the Dolphy here. That's a punt on my part. If they want to counter it, cool. If they want to counter it, untap Verdict, cool. I got a backup frog with another counter spell. It's fine. But I should have forced the issue and played the Dolphy there. Find another Dolphy. Preordain. Finds a long goodbye. Here's a Dolphy. And yeah. So I will say I did go look at their list after the match was over, and they're on like 1 Supreme Verdict in the sideboard. So pretty low odds for them to have it. But if my artifact opponent doesn't do anything like turn 1, 2, 3, I'm going to assume they've got it. Uh, Also, really, really bold to run Supreme Verdict in your Urza's Saga Cavern of Souls deck. So that's something. I should have gone ahead and pitched the Bowmaster here, the Frog, to try to get some extra damage. Like, if it's actually the case that they're on one Supreme Verdict, that's out of the equation. Long goodbye this construct so they can't gain any life when we're in a racing scenario. Second Urza, pretty decent. Bowmaster ping, but like I said before, I think I should have just ditched the Bowmaster to the Frog, get an extra card in the graveyard. Then I could have had another point of damage here. Otawara wasn't on my radar at all. They do have a decent number of ways of just like blanking my attacks. They have Otawara. We saw the Iganjo game 1. Saw Aether Spellbomb. Back in with the construct. Another, yep. Now, I will say this was a huge punt on my side. If you're watching my clock, I tanked for a while here. And part of the reason was I was trying to decide if I wanted to attack with both the Dolphy and the Frog. My opponent has got an Urza and a portable hole exiled to Dolphy. So I can sack the Dolphy, get the portable hole, and take out like the Shadow Spear to stop them from gaining life. If I do that, it means that I can't kill them with Frog this turn, and I'm not killing them next turn with Frog. So it's going to be like 3 turns. And with the double construct, the third construct off Saga coming next turn, and it's probably like an Aether Spellbomb to bounce my army token or something. I don't have enough pressure to actually kill them in that time frame. So I decide like, okay, I'm just going to ditch some stuff, jump the Frog, attack in, see what I draw, and try to maybe find like a Murktide or a Fatal Push or something like that. And through this whole process of tanking, I decided like, okay, well, if I'm attacking in, I need the damage. Let me get rid of the Stern Scolding and the Force Negation. Like, they're not doing anything for me anyway that Counterspell's not doing, except missing some potential stuff. So I discard those and then just completely forget to exile to jump the Frog to attack. So when my opponent blocks, it becomes, well, dang, that's a huge punt. How do I potentially salvage this? Well, I'll discard the counter spell, sack the Dolphy for the portable hole, take out the other construct. So the construct that blocked me will die to state-based actions. And at least, like, they've got an Urza and a construct, and I've got maybe the ability to find something off the draw. Really big mistake. I think I pointed it out on the Discord write-up that I really don't think it changed anything, because I would have ended up just drawing this Dolphy. They would have had the One Ring, Thopter Foundry. They could have started sacking off artifacts to get extra life and extra blockers in the air. So I don't think the punt ended up mattering, but it was a punt nonetheless. On to game number 2, or match number 2. On the draw, opponent leading on a Blood Crypt Nethergoyf, so my immediate assumption is Hollow One. I hold up a Spell Pierce for like a Goblin Lore or something like that. Oh, not Hollow One. Okay. So Grixis Nethergoyf. Grixis, aggro of some variety. Let's get down our own frog since we got force to protect it. Back in with the Nethergoyf. We'll just take that. Ah, it's Grixis Shadow. Nice. Good choice of decks, opponent. Not going to Toxic Deluge here because I don't want to tap myself off, so I'm fine just discarding that. Interesting little stack war here. So I attack in, they block with the Shadow. I'm going to discard something to try to eat the Shadow. If they wanted to go for like Bolt themselves, I'd have Spell Pierce. In this case, they go to Bolt me and I Spell Pierce it. Then discard to outgrow the Shadow. They go to discard or Bolt the Frog. So I'm just going to say, okay, shoot the Shadow, discard of the Frog. So my Frog lives. You got a Nethergoyf, but I got a Murktide to follow it up with next turn. So I feel in the driver's seat. Until they have a Boggart Trawler, which I was not expecting in a million years. Preordain and a Counterspell will help me rebuild a little bit. And it does find a Bauble, so they can grow the Nethergoyf. But I am A-okay ditching the Murktide to just have these bounce off each other. Because I'm not casting the Murktide anytime soon anyway, so might as well use it to prevent some damage. Fatal Push is a fantastic draw because they're really likely to block here. I've got the Counterspell for this Unholy Heat. I'm just going to go ahead and Fatal Push. If they had a Counterspell, then they would have countered my counter to their Heat. Since they didn't have one there, I'm just going to go ahead and Fatal Push to not give them a chance to draw into something like a Drown in the Lock. And if they want to spend their entire turn just like recasting the Nethergoyf, then that's cool. Because I can decide if I want to attack in and kill the Nethergoyf or not. Because I can always just discard what I draw. In this case, we'll let them bounce off each other, then Bowmaster it down. So I get to keep my Frog around, deal with the Nethergoyf, and have the much better board presence than if I just had the Frog. Raucous Theater to the bin. They bobble themselves, don't like what they see, and scoop it up. On to game 2. Sideboarding, pretty much just boarded out like forces and brought in a few pieces of Grave Hate, like the Unlicensed Hearse and the Ghostly or Ghost Vacuum. Not really a lot to sideboard here. Double Channeler into Thoughtseize is a good way to kill me. Just like a fetch land and a Bauble or something off of Delirium. Back with Channeler Pass, so I'm assuming their hand's pretty reactive, like Unholy Heat, Fatal Push, something like that. Maybe Drown in the Lock. They do not flip over Delirium. I was expecting a Spell Pierce or a Mystical Dispute on that, so really glad I got to dodge that piece of counter magic. But means since we top deck this Harbinger, we're just windmill slamming that, because if they do have a Fatal Push, they don't have Revolt for it. And if they have any red removal, they can't cast it off of a Watery Grave turned into an island. Get in an attack. We say, sure. You're going to have exactly Counterspell to stop this Murktide Regent. And I don't think any of these Grixis lists run actual Counterspell. Very tough on the mana to need like black red on 1 and black blue on 2. And so we escape with a little 2-0 against Grixis Shadow. Round number 4. 3. I can't remember. One way. Run the draw. Or no, on the play. On the play into Leyline of the Guild Pack. So I thought it was Zoo. I guess not based off Valakut. I don't really know what that means. Some sort of like Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Leyline Binding, Scion of Draco deck, I guess. I don't think there's any reason to run Leyline of the Guild Pact without Scion of Draco, but been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. Malevolent Rumbles will spell snare that. Shocking into Temple Garden, so we've got to assume either another Leyline Binding or a Bolt or something like that. Force Negation the Wrenn. Turn we can play out a Murktide and hold up Counter Spell. If they have like Leyline Binding, untap another Leyline Binding, so be it. Not getting better for us if we just sit here and like don't cast our Murktide. Okay, so decision point here. My opponent played this Wrenn, ticked up on a land, and I have the chance to kill them in 2 turns or kill the Wrenn and kill them in 3 turns. I don't think they have a Leyline Binding because they didn't cast it. So I kind of want to take the chance to just kill the Wrenn. My fear is that we already know they're missing land drops, and somehow hitting more land drops is going to give them a way to kill me with this Valakut out. So like a Dryad fetch land or something. Like maybe they have a Dryad in hand and they draw a fetch land for turn, or they can just fetch off the Arid Mesa, Dryad, get it back, Wrenn it back, something to get multiple Valakut triggers to kill my Murktide. And if I do that, I'm kind of donezo. So I'm just going to go ahead and kill off the Wrenn in 6. Hit them for 1. It's also a little bit better if they have something like the Ring to follow it up where I wasn't damaging them anyway. But it looks like their follow-up is just a Flage. Off my token. I'm gonna Fatal Push that. I'm assuming they're just getting Forest there to kind of play around Harbinger. But either way, no point in playing the Murktide here since this attack doesn't kill them regardless of what I do. So hold up Force Negation. We get heavily rewarded by being able to counter that 1 ring. And now we can untap and play a Murktide and finish off the job. Nice. Sideboarding against them. I didn't really have too much of expectations about like what I was up against. So I just ended up boarding in. I could have boarded in Ghost Vacuum, but didn't seem that good. I figured the Hearse hitting multiple cards as well as like fetches for Wrenn was a little better. So I boarded in the Hearse, boarded out a Deluge, boarded out the Fatal Pushes, or 3 of the pushes, and boarded in the Consigns because they hit the 1 ring, they hit Flage ETB, they hit Leyline Binding ETB, they hit Scion of Draco, which I'm still assuming that they are running Scion of Draco if they're running Leyline of the Guild Pact. That just seems like a super easy free roll. Harbinger, super, super good top deck if they didn't have a way to get a basic here. Now, if I had a Force of Negation, I would just Windmill Slam this Harbinger here with the expectation that they wouldn't be able to Leyline Binding at the end of my turn. They'd go to their turn. I'd force a negation the Leyline Binding and get to untap with Counterspell and protect it from there out. But since I don't have the force, and if I just hard cast the Harbinger and they go to their turn in Leyline Binding, I don't really have anything else going on. So I might as well just wait and see if like maybe they do just like they did. They fetch off of their basic. Unfortunately, they do have another basic. Meanies. And it looks like they're trying to play around Harbinger pretty aggressively by like holding up this white fetch every turn. Which is fine. Like, we're just going to Harbinger now. Because you got to waste your turn playing the Leyline Binding. Maybe I get a chance to draw a fourth land and just Psychic Frog plus Counterspell. Now, if they did have a one ring here for me, it's a little bit worse, but unfortunately with this style of deck, if you're missing something, like in this case, missing land drops, you kind of have to force the issue. And if you have to force the issue, it's better to force it early before you waste too much time and they have a chance to draw out of it. Find the thing they need and punish you for trying to force the issue. You for not forcing the issue early. But now that I got this cling for a Flage, I'm just kind of hoping to double up Bowmasters, speed up the clock that way. Dryad doesn't really matter. Wasn't expecting Endurance, but sure. It's funny to see Endurance off a mana base that has 2 green sources and 6 lands. Like, I don't know. It's a little trippy. Quad block this Endurance, get it off the battlefield since it has flying, so it can block the Psychic Frog. Again, Dryad not doing anything. Care about a Prismatic Ending either. Now I did have a line here to consider of Leyline Binding, or sink into Stupor the Leyline Binding, get back my Harbinger, and try to force the Leyline Binding. But then I remembered that the Plains is all land types, so they only have to pay 1 for the Leyline Binding, so they'd be able to cast it away or cast it again right away. Wrenn 6, kind of same argument as Dryad by itself. It just doesn't do anything. And here I kind of said, screw it. I'm going to go ahead and Leyline Binding. Get that like out of hand. If they want to Leyline Binding my Frog, then I get a Harbinger. And I don't know. It's not a great plan. But thankfully they didn't Leyline Binding right away. So I kind of punted and they kind of punted back. I should have just waited till their turn for like Leyline Binding so I could have force up. But that's the way it goes sometimes. You punt, they punt back. Go to round number 5. I don't know. I've had some not clean matches this event. Definitely did not deserve a top 16 finish. But that's how it is sometimes. Okay, so our hand is not particularly good into any of the Eldrazi decks. Kind of have to pick some avenue that you're going to try to fight on. I was saying I don't think my opponent has got very good mana, if they're leading on like a fetch land into a temple. So I'm going to fight over the talisman and try to get Frog down, buy myself a turn that they can't Kozilek's command, and then counterspell. Unfortunately, my opponent's mana was a lot better than I initially thought with the extra force and the Utopia Sprawl. Plus, they just had multiple Kozilek's commands. If you haven't played Dimir versus Eldrazi a lot, Kozilek's command is like a nightmare card to deal with. It kind of invalidates force negation since it's instant. Deals with all of your cheap threats, usually for like the cost of 2 or 3 lands on their side. So with any of the soul lands, it just becomes like, if they have 3 lands, they take out Frog. Myco Spawn's good. They got Cavern of Souls, which I don't know if Cavern of Souls is like a staple in the Eldrazi decks, but I feel like I don't see it that much. Either way, it is unfortunately really, really good against me here. Try to see if we can get them to waste like a Devour or something on my my Bowmaster. Emrakul. Okay, game's over. Can't counter it. Take my turn. So this is like less Eldrazi, or less like value Eldrazi and more just turbo Emrakul, it looks like. Which I guess is fine. Poured in a bunch of Dothies. Let's go back. There is sideboarding was just like mystical disputes and prayers. Or not mystical disputes, consigned to memory and prayers. I think I brought in a mystical dispute because I didn't really have much else to bring in, and I really wanted to get like the fatal pushes and long goodbye out. I could have kept in to shoot the sheriff. Ultimately, I think if your opponent casts stuff and you don't have consigned to memory, then the game's kind of over. I don't think it really matters if you're killing big Eldrazi after they come down. Like if they're casting Devourers and you don't have consigns, then they just exile your Frog or Murktide or whatever, and your shoot the sheriff doesn't matter. So I think like relying on those kill spells is a bit of a losing effort. Mulligan decisions. First hand, I think this hand just like didn't do anything, which is why I threw it back. Like, best case scenario, I've got Preordained for a land, then turn 2 Dothy. I'm hoping they don't have double soul land. I can't interact with it. If they follow up that double soul land with like a Myco spawn, then I've just got a counter spell, let them get a Cavern of Souls again, and the hand's just useless after that. So I really want to find a hand with like a Frog, consign, something like that. Second hand was even worse. Bowmasters and Murktides and fetch lands. Third hand, not good. I just can't mulligan lower. Like I'm sitting here with Preordained to try to find a Frog and some lands and pray. I thought about leaving up Spell Pierce on turn 1 for a Utopia Sprawl, or more specifically for like a soul land into a talisman, just like that, and ended up not going for it. Then same thing as game 1, Myco spawned for a Cavern of Souls, and the game's kind of over. I did find it pretty ironic. I have not run into much Eldrazi in the leagues recently, so I ended up taking out Break the Ice. And as soon as I did, ran into Eldrazi in the challenge And all I could think this whole time was like, man, I really wish I had Break the Ice. Because I don't think people understand how much you can set this deck back by just going like turn 1 Cantrip, turn 2 Break the Ice, turn 3 Harbinger. Especially if you can take out like an Ugin's Labyrinth. You set them back on mana, you set them back on a card, you get a clock. Might not be a great clock, but it's a clock. Alright, so we're just going to jam Murktide because sitting on Counterspell doesn't do a lot of good while they got Cavern out. Here's Lux Command to hit my Dolthy. And a 1 ring. So pretty positive that's game over, but we can kind of kick a few turns just to see what happens. They kicked Myco Spawn. Myco Spawn's also a nightmare card in the matchup. Just kind of being able to like ramp themselves, hit us while we're already a pretty mana limited deck. Hey, look, it can sign the memory. I don't like really know what I'm looking for at this point. Fortunately, it doesn't matter because Emrakul just says whatever you were looking for is mine now. I could counter the cast trigger, but I'm still just losing to a 13/13 flying trampler, so be it. On to round number 5. I think we're like 2-2 at this point. But we're on the play with the frog. Got to count for something, right? Breeding Pool Preordain. No idea what that means I'm up against. Blooded Strand for Godless Shrine. Even less of an idea. My only guess is some sort of zoo deck. But Preordain's kind of a weird one to see. Alright, so it is a zoo deck. Could have counterspelled. I'm just going to shoot the Sheriff, save my counterspell for something more impactful. Harbinger locks him out here. And spoiler alert, I'll fast forward here. But Harbinger is just going to hit them in the face 7 times. So we'll skip ahead slowly. Like literally nothing happens. Harbinger hits them in the face. Move on to the sideboard. That's why I love Harbinger so much in the main deck. Like, it's just some free wins. Another preordained start. Hold up Consign to Memory for a Scion of Draco. Which, I guess I can't play Scion on turn 2, but there's nothing else I'm doing, so I might as well hold up mana anyway. Getting the frogs a nice little bonus. Expressive Iteration. So, Preordained Psychic Frog Expressive Iteration with Scion of Draco. I'm assuming Leyline of the Guild Pact as well, because like their mana base doesn't look very conducive to Scion of Dracos. Thought about Mystical Disputing the Psychic Frog there. Probably could have. I was thinking Stubborn Denial. Like, Stubborn Denial on my Mystical Dispute means I lose a card for no real reason, but if I untap and long goodbye, then I don't care about Stubborn Denial at all. And then definitely punished myself here. I could have just main phase Long Goodbye the Psychic Frog. When they shocked in this breeding pool, it was like, okay, they have to have Stubborn Denial, right? Stubborn Denial or like Spell Pierce, Mystical Dispute, something like that. Long Goodbye gets around those. So I feel like I don't have to cast this on my turn. Maybe I can make them commit mana on their turn. I did not think that they had Veil of Summer in their Preordained, Psychic Frog, Expressive Iteration, Leyline Binding deck. So like true 100% zoo. Just every color card known to man. This is less zoo and more just 5-color frog. Which is interesting. Take the Harbinger, because hey, if you don't have an answer, then that's just going to stop all of the mana shenanigans. Now, they do have Preordain, and I'm kind of assuming, based off the land construction, they also have Counterspell just in their 75. Because looking over and seeing Watery Grave, Steam Vents, Breeding Pool, Meticulous Archive, like all these blue producing shock lands, makes me assume Counterspell exists in their deck. They're going to hit me. Okay. Come on. This turn, I'm not a huge fan of how I played this turn. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. Was it this turn? Might have been next turn, now that I think about it. So Counterspell, Consign, both aren't really doing anything for me because neither of them stop an opposing counterspell if they have one. Okay, so it wasn't this turn. I thought about playing the Murktide, but if they do have a counterspell, and you got to remember last turn they ditched 3 cards and kept 1 in hand. So I have to assume that 1 is something they can cast, or they're just bluffing. And if they're bluffing, it doesn't really matter what play I go with, it's going to work out in the end. If they're not bluffing and that last card is a counter spell, then I don't want to hard cast the Murktide into the counter, because then they can go like counter my Murktide. I could spell snare or spell pierce or mystical dispute, and they could pay for it either way. So I'm going to go for the Sink into Super on their upkeep. So if they have the counter spell, like so, they get to stop my Sink into Stupor, but I get to resolve a Murktide next turn. And the Murktide, at the moment, is not going to be bigger than the Frog, but now it is. So, paid for assuming Counterspell, or paid off for assuming Counterspell. Paid off for finding a second Murktide. If I didn't find another Murktide, then I would have just played like a really small Murktide here to try to plan for drawing a second one. Now, I will say, if you notice opponent's clock here, it drops down like a couple minutes, and I go to blocks and it drops down like a bit more, wait for it, and they discard some stuff and eat some stuff and float some mana. They obviously like don't have anything. They're just putting mana, discarding stuff, taking game actions. Cool. I get to my turn here and get ready to attack, and you'll see there's like more drops in my opponent's time. They were saying something in chat like, you know, you're dead for top 8, right? And instead of typing anything back, I just kind of hit him in the face with Murktide. So, Raydan, if you watch this, I know I was dead for top 8, but now so are you. Either way, I was playing for top 16 prizes anyway, so still going positive. Either way, on to round number 6. We are on the play. We got a frog. We got a force. About everything you can ask for out of a good FrogTide hand. See what we're up against. Cash grab. So immediate thought is some sort of aspiring spike deck. Green cash grab. Probably delirium based. Some kind of shifting woodlands deck. All right. Sorin gives it away. I saw Andrea Mengucci posted a tweet about this deck. Like, literally saw the tweet maybe 2 hours before this event about what was it, like some wise philosopher saying the One Ring can make any deck better. Well, what about Slivers, or what about like Morophon, the Boundless? So it's a deck that's just trying to like Sorin in Morophon, or hardcast Morophon, or shifting woodlands to copy Morophon, to be able to cast like your Sliver Hive Lords for free and stuff like that. I don't get it. Not my kind of deck, but at the end of the day, like, opponents sitting here right with me playing a win and into top 16. So what do I know about Magic? Either way, Frog and Merc going to take down game 1. Game 2, I ended up like boarding out some Bowmasters and boarding in Dalthies, just off of the fact that Dalthy exiles all this stuff going to the graveyard, and at least shuts off the shifting woodlands plan. And based off that being like a Sorin, Morophon, hash grab, Malevolent Rumble deck, they really don't have much as far as interaction goes. So gonna kind of hope if I find any threat, it kind of carries me. In the meantime, we'll just counter everything known to man. Like, literally everything. Didn't know that cash grab was an instant, so that's kind of cool. Or Sorin, or I sink into super the Sorin because I 100% expected a Veil of Summer based on then shocking in one more land, like a green source. So I figured I'll just like sink into super this. When they go for it again next turn, I'll counter spell. And drew the Dalthy. I wanted to play the Dalthy, but if I did and they went for Sorin, I went for counterspell, and they had Veil, then game might just be over. So I kind of have to sit on double counterspell, as much as it pains me. Till we find a forest. Now we're not sitting on double counterspell anymore. Counter the Sorin. There's the Veil of Summer. Here's the Force of Negation. Now we could put in a Sorin, like down ticket and do nothing and pass. It's technically a win condition, right? Nope. Okay. Okay. So we're going to counter a One Ring, which means we got a One Ring in exile with a void counter for Dalthy. You don't get the option very much, so we're just going to One Ring. Unfortunately, One Ring finds us a land, which means we've got to dodge top decks from our opponent, find something with our ring, which we at least get half of that covered. We have lethal next turn. opponent draws dead and ends up scooping. So good times, I guess. Okay, let's talk about the deck. Let's talk about the good and bad and the ugly. First off, the punts against Thoptersword round 1 definitely hurt, because one more win and we would have been locked for top 8, but didn't happen that way. That's kind of on me. I decided to jump into the challenge very last minute with a list that I wasn't super confident in. Like, I don't think Consigned to Memory is as good in the main right now as it was a month ago when there was Eldrazi everywhere. But if Eldrazi's making a resurgence, then it could be a little bit better. Shoot the Sheriff, first long goodbye. I think Shoot the Sheriff is better in basically every matchup that isn't the Oculus Frog mirror. And I think you're already favored in that matchup, so you don't really need to make concessions just for it. So I would go back to a second copy of Shoot the Sheriff and no copies of Long Goodbye in the 75. The Toxic Deluge, it's fine. We didn't run into any Boros this challenge, but as always, we know Boros is all over the place. I have really liked the second copy of Cling to Dust in the main. So I might swap out like the Long Goodbye back for the second Shoot the Sheriff, the Consigned to Memory for the second Cling to Dust, and go from there for a little bit. See how that feels to me. In the sideboard, the Dolthies, don't do it. Just don't run the Dolthies. It's not worth the slot unless you're just like a masochist when it comes to deck building. And then, hey, by all means, run Dolthy. I will be replacing Dolthy with probably like a third piece of Grave Hate. Some leagues recently I've been running like one Hearse, one Ghost Vacuum, one Nihil Spellbomb, because there's occasional matchups where you want like 2 of the 3, but you don't want the third. For instance, against Living End, Hearse is good, Spellbomb's good, Ghost Vacuum's too slow. Against the Unearthed decks, Ghost Vacuum's good, Hearse is good, Nihil Spellbomb's a little awkward. Like, you can stop them hard casting an Oculus, but you really want the repeatable piece of Grave Hate for Unearth itself. Stuff like that kind of makes some version or some Grave Hate pieces a little bit better than others in different matchups. I'll probably go back to some number of Break the Ice. Like, I'm sorry, as soon as I cut Tron hate pieces, I see Tron. So I'm just not going to mess around with that too much more. Just run the Tron hate pieces. Third Stern Scolding's definitely a flex spot. Kind of depends on how much you want to fight Frog. For me, in the mirror, in the Oculus matchup mirror, so like me on normal Murktide, them on Oculus, countering a Frog is super, super nice, because a lot of times it just like shuts off their ability to Oculus for a couple extra turns and can leave Unearthed stranded in hand, stop them from applying any pressure, and give you time to like build up to a Murktide. So the extra Stern Scolding's actually really, really good in that matchup. Dolthy is okay. It's like, it's decent, but if you're on the draw and they play turn 2 Frog and you want a Dolthy, they can just respond with discarding. So a lot of times Dolthy is going to be like awkwardly timed. So just be careful of that. If you, again, are a masochist with deck building and decide to register Dolthy, that's on you. I'm telling you not to. Either way, that's our top 16 video. Ended up 14th place. Pretty decent little challenge payout. But other than that, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, hope everybody stays safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.